Hello, I'm Donna Alvermann from the University of Georgia, and I'm glad to be speaking here at the University of Wyoming this afternoon in relation to something that's a very big interest to me, and I think probably to many of you. That is, what is 21st century literacies? Most of us have a pretty good idea, because we are actually involved in these and use them in our daily lives. But what I'm addressing in this particular mini lecture is what our students can teach us if we're willing learners. And I would even go beyond that and say, if you're a parent, what your children can teach you if you're a willing learner. I'm organizing this mini lecture into 3 parts. First part is the future is here, all, gaps and all. And the second part will be how to address those gaps. And the third part, 21st century text, multimodal, yes they are, and in need of critique, definitely. So the first section, the future is here. We've seen this for, well, almost a decade now about wearable computing. It is still in the future. I just saw something recently where they're bringing it into Facebook. Something is being developed all the time, but it's still a ways away before most of us really want to have something like this. This kind of worries me a little bit. It's a Google Glass, and it had many people excited about it. It doesn't have the best of all capabilities in the sense of apps yet, etc. There have been some stoppages of the program and deciding not to go forward with it, etc. I actually know somebody who tried out the Google Glass, was not at all impressed by it, but I wanted to put it in here just because this may become as common as any of the other devices that we use. This, however, Scratch Junior, is definitely, it arrived in 2014. I've been reading a lot about it lately. This program actually teaches 3-year-olds how to code, or in other words, how to program. And it has a lot of supporters, because some people are saying in the future, you either code or you will be coded. And that's rather, as fast as technology is developing, the idea that unless I have some control and can code for myself, somebody else will do that for me, and I will be coded. What you could do, if you're interested in this, is to go to Google and Google in Scratch Junior. The version that I have is a little bit behind right now, but it's basically the same idea, and you can see how 3-year-olds could actually manipulate something and learn to code. Now, it's a progressive sort of thing. They don't come out of a session learning to be coders, but it gets them to thinking about what blocks you put together. Think Lego or something like that. Some of my friends who use Minecraft said that they actually see a lot of Scratch Junior in Minecraft, and I've read some articles about that. It's fascinating how the young children are going to become coders in the future. We're already talking about it in the schools. I teach it, as I said, at the University of Georgia, but I have many students in my classes who are first-year teachers, and they are getting some updates on what this will be like and some advanced, I wouldn't say training, but some advanced notice of how they could build in some of the literacy learning that they would typically do for them, they themselves would do as teachers, how they're going to let the kids code in or program some of this information. I share with you the idea of teens' uses of social media platforms just as a way to show how sometimes research can contradict, often does contradict what the public idea or impression is. And if you read most papers today or talk to the students or your own children, they'll say, oh, Facebook is for the old people. It's not used much by young people at all. That actually is incorrect if you believe in the Pew Internet Report in 2015. Facebook is actually still among all users very popular, and as a result of that, the teens who are on it have a way of actually coding their messages so that if they have family members on and are fairly comfortable with that, they can still code things, but not in the sense of Scratch Junior, but rather say something in a lingo or whatever that still gets a funny joke across to their friends. And a person that writes a lot on this Dana Boyd, has actually talked about how this is the way that families can enjoy social media together, that everybody has a message. Sometimes the older people in the family are sending straightforward messages, and the teens are sending coded messages. So it's a fun book to read if you're interested in what you might be missing if you are friends with your children or with your students on Facebook. I know that has some issues rather in the public schools. I find this an interesting statistic. Again, it's coming from Pew Internet. If you're not familiar with that site, you might want to go there. They have surveys that they do on almost every topic imaginable, immigration, etc. And it's fairly well respected as being a well carried out survey, etc. In this instance, for example, who were these 13 to 17-year-olds? They were a national representative group. And it was a phone survey of 802 parents, and there are 802 teens who are aged, as I said, 13 to 17. Now, the interviews were conducted in English and Spanish and on landline and cell phones. So this is an improvement over earlier surveys that were done, because sometimes the people didn't have landlines. They might have had cells by that time, but the survey was not very representative in using just a landline. This one you can pretty much trust. I find it interesting. The one fact that they don't show here in this slide is that, yes, people may possess or have access to a smartphone, but the amount of time they can use it in the month will depend upon their data plan. And quite frankly, there is a big gap between people who can afford a fairly extensive service and those who get a very basic service. So there definitely is something missing from that slide, and I wanted to share that with you. This is something that maybe you have experienced yourself, and I don't know what your feelings would be about it, but a student that is an advisee of mine, is a doctoral student, was quite troubled by this. She was working with a group of freshmen in a college at the University of Georgia, and she needed to be getting in touch with them. She was like their mentor, and she needed to have them contact her when she had, say, graded a paper and then they were not doing what she thought they should be doing. She needed to get in touch with them. So and she's very smart, tech smart. So the incident that happened and that I recorded here really happened with her. Her name was Emily. The student says, "What? You need me?" And Emily says, "Yes, I had a question about your schedule." "Oh, what? Could you put your answer, could you not just answer my phone call? Clearly you have a phone in front of you." "Yeah, but I didn't know what you were calling about. You could text me?" "Emily, I'm going to call you now. Please answer." And she wasn't trying to be difficult, but her point was it was too much to put in a text message, and she therefore wanted the student to comply. I find this interesting because I also, as a professor, even working with doctoral level students, not freshmen, in college, that they often will prefer a text over anything else, even if it's just to say, "I'll call you later," or something like that. Texting is very popular, as you probably are aware. I show you this slide because this is too much to even take a peek at right now in my presentation today. It is filled with information about visual literacy. And as we get further into the lecture today, you'll see why visual literacy is becoming more and more important, both in schools and in the way we just deal in life in general. A lot of things are either moving or still images, and many times the information that they provide is caught up and far more rich in a shorter space of time than is a language message. So I would say this is an excellent site to go to, and if you just Google in source, you will find many things of interest for you at that point. So yes, we're in the 21st century, well into it, and visual kinesthetic cues are important. A paper that was written by that in 2012 can also be accessed if you're interested in further information on that. But basically, what they found was this. When teacher beliefs and technology integration are in sync, in other words, teachers believe that technology can be used as a tool in the classroom and that kids can learn that way. They're not just surfing the web or whatever. When that happens, actually a lot of learning can go on. That doesn't always happen because many times now the schools, I know it's true in Athens, Georgia, the schools and the public schools all have, for example, iPads that the kids are asked to use, and the teachers are well versed in how to use them, etc. But it's still a new technology, and so you have 25 students in front of you, all with their iPads, and you can't see what they're really looking at, and you're trying to teach something. We at the university, I'm a teacher educator at the university, and I am working with the teachers in the classrooms to show them, what do you do when you walk into when you are faced with a class of people that are looking at you as if they have no attention on you, but they're all eyes on the screen. So this is difficult, the visual kinesthetic cues, getting them to sync with what we want to teach the students in the schools, with what they're interested in learning, etc. And it's not easily solved, and there's hardly any research on it yet. So going back to what are 21st century literacies, you hear the word technology enabled, yes, but it's more than that. And one of the things you're going to learn in this mini lecture will be, well, what is it then? I'm going to skip that right now and go to the next part, because this is the biggest critique about 21st century literacies. People say, new? What's new about it? We've seen and done many of these things with visuals and oral presentations, performance presentations. There's nothing really all that new about it, is there? And actually, the answer is yes, but for that answer to hold and to be convincing to people, you have to say new, but in a certain way, not new temporally. In time, we've been doing these sorts of things, multimedia, for years, so that's not new. There's multimedia when you think of things beyond the schools. But what is new is that it's changing very rapidly, that now with societal, economic, and technological changes being so quick upon one another, that it will always be new. So when you hear someone say new literacies, rather than saying, what's new about that, you can say temporally, no, they're not new. But the fact that they're always changing means they always will be new, okay? Also, there's something else new, that what we call the ethos, E-T-H-O-S. The ethos of new literacies is much more collaborative than when I went to school, or when maybe some of you went to school and remember. The whole idea is to help one another out, not to retain the information for ourselves, but only to give and then to receive back. So that whole ethos of collaboration is a big new, I think, and that wasn't around much in education prior to the time of having all of this, these devices available to us. For those of you who might be worried, like, okay, so 21st century literacies involve this many things, like the basics, yes. Creativity, yes. Cultural modes, yes. Effective manipulation and instruction, yes. In other words, you could say almost anything you could throw into this particular slide would be a yes. It does cover a whole lot, and therein is the problem. Sometimes if something means a lot of everything, then it means nothing, really. And that's a danger. So I hope that, I put this slide in on purpose because I wanted you to see how crowded the space is, and pretty soon everything is a 21st century literacy until it becomes 22nd century literacy. But I want to narrow the focus somewhat because it is actually much more interesting, I think, when we take a look at what research has shown us that 21st century literacies are, and how this might be impacting your classroom, your home, your library, wherever you come in contact with students and young people wanting to use the technology of today. First of all, there's a person named Mimi Ito. She's listed in at the bottom of the screen. In 2010, she did a study that is still being cited almost every day somewhere in the world, because she found out what, in a 3-year ethnography, which meant that she was in people's homes and she was studying things with her doctoral students, etc., and for a long period of time, 3 years, to find out exactly what use young people were making of digital media. She had 23 cases. That's a large multi-case study. And she also worked at home, in their homes, when they were online at various sites, and in an after-school program. So her research is well known. Her name is Mimi Ito. That's her nickname, Mimi. She goes by. You're going to see a short clip of about 3 minutes in just a few minutes in this in my mini lecturette. First of all, she had 3 findings. First of all, it's social media, digital media, is just hanging out, engaging in friendship, and you can read the rest of the slide. I like that, just being. These were direct quotes from students that she was studying. It's also messing around. In other words, learning to find your own way, make mistakes or whatever, just messing around and finding out, experimenting with new digital media, and finding a niche. That was important in her research, because young people this age like to be at least in some group, whether it's a geek group or a sports group or whatever. They want to be in a gang. And one of the ways to do that is to engage in these literacies. And the third one she found out actually was geeking out. That was just interest driven. They were online, what we call affinity groups. You didn't know who was online with you. It might not actually be someone of the same age. It didn't matter. It could be somebody who was knowledgeable about something you were interested in, and that was enough. And that gave you what was called geek cred. And there's a lot of anxiety in there, as I tried to show in the little image to the left. In an image of anxiety, rather, because geeks are very knowledgeable about maybe a very small niche area, and they can tell right away if you're an interloper into their group online. In other words, you don't really know much about it and you're slowing them down or whatever. And they even took to rewriting rules about how to communicate. So this is a pretty high level communication, and I tried it just for fun, getting into something, a fan fiction site that I knew I really wasn't very good at, to see how long I could sort of fool my way through it. And it didn't take long at all. It was polite. They just said maybe I'd like to go to another website where there were some beginning fan fiction writers. So it was a nice way to say, move out of our space. So there's a lot of communication going on. All right, the next section, I said there would be 3 sections rather. The next one is addressing the gap, learning from and with students. And I keep emphasizing what we can learn from students. As I said in the introductory slide, that was the subtitle. I think it's all too often, if we're not comfortable using a technical strategy or using a particular device, we say it's interrupting the kind of the pedagogy that's worked for a long time and we know and we like, etc. It can also be an excuse, and I've used it myself before, when something is too confusing right now for me to spend much time to work on. So one of the things that I think we have to do is to say sometimes we're not going to be the authorities in the classroom. We're not going to know more than the people sitting in our classroom or moving about in makerspace or wherever you are meeting up with adolescents and working with them on digital literacies. So Mimi Ito, the one that I told you had done this great ethnography in 2010 and is still cited and thought highly of, she is going to probably be the spokesperson for a long time, because she had a huge grant and the grant keeps getting renewed, etc. And many people want to work with her. So what you're going to hear her say in a few minutes or a few seconds now will be something that you can pretty much know is up to date and where she's at beyond that 2010 book she wrote. But that book, that study, drove everything you're going to see. Mimi Ito is about connected learning. And I'll let you read that on the screen. There's no need for me to read it to you. But I just want you to think about it as you're reading, that this is one of the things that's new about digital literacies or new literacies. It's new actually because up till now, when we've had all of this technology and the devices and they've been distributed in schools, in families, wherever, workplaces, it wasn't possible to communicate. In other words, the connectedness in learning was almost like a rhetorical thing, like let's connect learning outside of school to inside of school or whatever, but it never was able to actually be done until we reached what we call the 21st century digital era. And she has many things on connected learning, a website that you can go to and become a member of and get lots of emails. So if you don't like a lot of information and text coming your way, I wouldn't join that group. But I will say that the video that you are about to see I'd like to have you be thinking about these things as you see it. Number one, what are the parameters of connected learning? Just isn't wide open. It's not like everything. There are definite parameters, and she will talk about those, or at least you can infer from her talk that she's relating that. She also has a big concern about equity and access, and equity is a word sometimes that gets confused with equality, and people say, oh, they're just synonyms, but I differ in that. I think they can be discriminated and distinguished from one another a bit better than that. Equity let me start with equality. Equality means that everybody gets a pair of shoes, let's say. That's equality. Equity means that the pair of shoes that you get fits your needs or fits your context or your situation. So there's a big difference there, and she gets at the equity issue of, yeah, you might get everything in your school and it's handed out to everybody, but it's not the same when we think about equity versus equality. And of course, there's always that issue of access. Some parts of the world have very little access to the internet still. Even in this country, there are places where the access would be available if people had the money to pay for the monthly plans. So she hits pretty hard on what we need to do. It's a very short video, about 3 minutes, so you'll have to listen carefully to pick up on this. And finally, a plan for getting where we need to be. She's pretty prescriptive, not in real life, but in this particular video, in terms of saying, let me leave you with this message, folks. And I will hope that you will enjoy her video.
I think what makes connected learning unique within the spectrum of possibilities is that connected learning isn't about a particular platform, technology, or a technique, but it's really an approach to learning. It's an approach to trying to understand how learning operates that's fairly agnostic as to the technique or platform, but really is about what is the experience for the learner, what does the learning look like, and then from there you can say, oh, we could use open resources, we could use a flipped approach, we could bring in schools, museums. It's agnostic as to the technique, the institution, but it's really about saying for each learner, there is a kind of experience that is optimal from a learning perspective, and that is keyed to what it means to really thrive and grow up in a digital and networked age. I think right now we're at a critical historical moment for an approach to learning that is about social connectivity, that's about exploration, discovery, inquiry-based learning, that's driven by real-world problems tied to young people's interests and identities. We're seeing a tremendous opportunity in today's networked world around social connectivity, the ability to mobilize relationships and communities and causes, as well as the open ecosystem of information and knowledge exchange. This is an unprecedented opportunity. In a lot of ways, the learning philosophy is something that has been around for a long time in progressive education. The idea of connecting learning to real-world engagement, about having porous boundaries between the classroom and the community and the home. These ideas of learning and what makes good learning is not new. It's just that we've been handed these tools to suddenly make these forms of progressive, empowered, inquiry-based learning accessible in a much more broad-based way. We're seeing a widening gap between the privileged and less privileged young people and families. So in the period from the 70s to the 2000s, we've seen an escalation of expenditures in wealthy households for enrichment and learning type activities, where those from less privileged households have basically seen sort of a stable and low amount of expenditure. So what's happening is that families who are highly educated and wealthy recognize that learning that's focused on interests and enrichment, out-of-school learning, learning that makes productive use of new technologies, that these are the ways that kids are really getting ahead, becoming sort of top-tier learners. And they're going outside of our public infrastructures, whether that's the school or the library, in order to access, pay for, gain this additional advantage. And the tragic thing is that this differentiation, this inequity is expanding at a period when the technology actually allows much broader access, that there's nothing from a resourcing point of view that is keeping kids from accessing these opportunities online, but young people don't have the institutional, the social, and the educational supports necessarily to find those opportunities. So it's really a question of a failure of will rather than resources. And that's where I think we really will only have ourselves to blame if we don't take hold of this opportunity.
All right, so connected learning. I had mentioned that you could become part of that community and do hangouts with them, talk with people who are interested in connected learning. That's kind of, her name is connected with connected learning, because that's what the grant that she was funded with and then continues to be funded with, that's what it's all about. So connected learning is like a brand name anymore. If you say that, you mean several things. But I wanted to show you who the people are in this, a few of the people. Craig Watkins does a lot on the Connected Learning Research Network. That's what CLRN stands for, and they're putting together all of their research projects, and it's on a page called CLRN Project. So you can go there if you're trying to do a term paper or whatever and want to be right up to date with what connected learning folks are doing right now. This is the place to go. He does some community type work in the digital age. Chris Gutierrez, again, another member of Mimi Ito's team, does, sounds pretty complicated, leveraging horizontal expertise. Basically, it means how do you get something out of what you're doing and it still benefits somebody else through your expertise. expertise. And the horizontal means that you don't have to go up to the expert, but rather everybody could be an expert, potentially an expert if brought into this conversation. That again is something new about new literacies, this idea of collaboration. Hasn't been around before now. A person that you probably, if you're in a college, university lab class or whatever, you will have heard of Jim G. He has done a lot of work recently on video games. He didn't start out doing that, but that's probably what he's going to be ended up being remembered most for, is his work on learning with video games. But in this particular picture, and it is about a video game, but in this particular picture, when I look at him, I think about what he says that always makes me remember what I need to do or think about as an instructor at the university level, and what I hope teachers think about as instructors in their classrooms. And that is, people are becoming experts without formal credentials. I just love that idea. Remember, I just had said earlier, that horizontal point where you can learn from people who are on the same level as you. You don't always have to find somebody with more expertise, but you learn and put your expertise together. It's a beautiful idea, and that's what I think is, as I said, one of the points about the ethos of the new literacies. Now I'll turn from a very happy sort of, yes, the world is rosy, etc., to something that I find quite interesting. This survey was done by a group not particularly well known, but still it was an interesting study. And I think that even if you don't believe that it was the best study in the world, you may have had some of these scenarios going on in your own head. They got a group of people together and they were told to think about what life would be like in 2020 and how much the internet would impact or not impact it. And so those that were positive said there would be no notable cognitive shortcomings. In other words, it's not going to hurt your ability to think critically and to operate as much as you did before technology came into our lives. Technology meaning the digital. Technology's been around since the pencil, and before that, obviously, the stone to carve something on the cave walls. Another scenario is that people will be so adept at finding answers to deep problems that this worry that we have that people are just skimming and surfing the web will have gone away, because we will see how people are going to use the internet to be that astute about how to learn and to go deep into their learning. And then they also said they can search effectively and access collective intelligence via the internet. That whole idea again of that horizontal collaboration where you can collectively come up with some great answers that you would not necessarily be able to do by yourself. Now, the other side of the equation is, this is a group that thought negatively. 42% of them agreed on these 3 points. Have you read those to yourself? You can probably tell I'm an optimist all the way around, to the extent of it being a fault almost. But I actually like to think that the people who are saying things on the negative side, I'm sure that some of this will be accurate, but I'm also thinking that we don't even know yet, especially as I showed you in that one of the first few slides about Scratch Junior, where 3-year-olds are learning how to code or program. When you put that kind of a power, I cannot program, I cannot code, okay? I know people who can, and I could learn to, I suppose, but it's not something that I particularly want to spend my time on. But giving 3-year-olds that advanced start of learning to play Lego-like type games and to build in that the idea of how to actually program or code just blows my mind. Now, this is, I have to say, this is in other words, a Pew Internet project again. I've shown you several results from Pew Internet. It's very well respected in the academic world. And this report out in 2012 made me maybe a little bit less optimistic. 94% of the people use Google or another online search engine to do what they call research. And as a professor at a university where we teach doctoral students, master's level, undergraduate students, etc., that's not really the way I would like to think that the students who are turning research papers into me are doing their research. Because there's a lot of cut and pasting that can be done when you do things like this, and it doesn't really lead to the kind of research papers that I think I would, not think, I know that I am interested in seeing students in my classes turn in. So that's a bit of a downer. But this is a Pew Internet project survey, and very well done, as I explained in one of the earlier ones to you. So we have to take it, I guess, at face value. I'm not surprised that a lot of people use Wikipedia or other online encyclopedias instead of pulling something off the shelf that was in book form. I will say, though, that academics, people at the universities now who are writing and making research projects that then hopefully influence some people's thinking, that they are now beginning to cite Wikipedia. It used to be, oh, it's just a site I go to when I really don't know anything about anything, but then when I'm really going to do my research, I will put Wikipedia out of my mind, because it's a social media site. It's a way of building knowledge for everybody to share, and when everybody has a share in that, building that knowledge, mistakes, actual attempts to manipulate people's thinking can be built into it. But the community that makes Wikipedia available is also on the watch for anything that's in there. Think about the geeks back in Mimi Ito's study. There would be geeks watching to see whether information that they feel is incorrect being published on Wikipedia. So there's a bit of a balance there, but again, people's ideologies, in other words, their belief systems, how they see the world, the lenses that they use, will definitely make a difference in terms of what they're reading. Wikipedia is probably more to the progressive, more liberal view of things, whereas you can turn to another site and get a conservative view of Wikipedia. So if you look up Wikipedia and all the different kinds, you'll find this one is the most popular, the one just called Wikipedia. But then you can find other sites that are actually giving you another viewpoint, a more conservative viewpoint, let's say. And this is wonderful fun for people in middle grades to do in high school with their students, is to say, okay, now, two Wikipedias operating here, which one is, quote, showing the truth? And of course, that would lead to a good discussion and maybe never an answer that could be ascertained. It's largely how you view the world. But the fact is, I think this is a good thing to do with students, because if they think that Wikipedia is just objectively talking about everything, they may not be. They may be leaving out details, say, of an author's life that should be in there, or vice versa. So it's a real good tool to use when we come to critical thinking, which will be toward the end of this, this talk. Third section, 21st century texts. They are multimodal. Again, multimodal is not new. We've seen that for many, many years. But they're multimodal in a way that they're being collaboratively produced, and that is new. As I've said several times in this mini lecture, the idea that the ethos of new digital media literacies, etc., they're actually working together to collectively form knowledge about something is quite new and quite exciting. And I've actually observed it by watching students in libraries when they've been sent there to do work. If they don't have access at home to a computer, they can go and work on the library's computers for 20 minutes, and then they must get off, in my area anyway of the country, and then let somebody else on, but then they can get back on again. But I watch them as they start to do their homework, and the homework, depending on who is giving it for what purpose, it may be enough to keep their attention. At other times, it's something that's really a learning situation. It's not just going to the news, the baseball sweeps or whatever to find information on something that they're interested in that's unrelated, let's say, to the assignment. But it's something that the assignment ticks something off in them and they immediately go searching for this. And this whole idea of students coming up with their own text, again, will be influenced by their belief systems, their family belief systems, etc. It's wide open for the need for people to do something in terms of getting these kids to look critically at what they are producing and consuming. So students have changing perceptions about text. They don't think of them anymore as just a single book or a single magazine or journal or whatever. They think of them as extensions of each other. And that, what we're talking about here, is a big word called intertextuality. But that's what it means, that books are ideas. They don't have to be in books. It can be any printed or visual information. A movie you saw, and that says to you, I know a song or a musical production of that. And all of this coming together is the idea that there are many texts now, and they are multimodal. It's not just the linguistic text or the text that's coming out of my mouth right now, which is the oral language. There are two ways of reading a text. Any text, whether it's a visual, a oral, a performative, an icon, we're using the word text in a very broad sense. You can treat it as a box with something inside. In other words, get to the bottom of that box and find the truth. Or you can start looking for what it signifies. In other words, what is that message showing you by the size of the letters, maybe by the sound of the comic characters, a voice coming in, a super hero, whatever. What is there about that, and what kind of meaning is being signified? This is so much fun to teach when you're in the upper grade levels. I would imagine even in the lower grade levels, to the extent that you know what you're trying to accomplish with this idea of looking for signification or for meaning. And then also this way of reading a text says that you should annotate, interpret, and question. Okay, that's not a bad definition at all. I would say this definition is probably present in roughly 95% of the schools or the students' classrooms that I observe in, and in my own classroom too. But another way of reading text in the 21st century is to think of it as text is just a cog in a complex machine, okay? You don't worry about the interpretation and the annotation and all of that. You can read a text, the same text, for two different reasons. And when I say read it, I don't mean just for the printed text, but I'm saying look at a picture, a moving image, a still image. Listen to sounds of the ocean or whatever. Look at an icon, watch a dance performance. Those are all texts, and you can ask, does it work or not for me? If you are this kind of a reader, text is a cog in a complex machine. If it does, how does it work for you? This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. This is where I think it's important that we, in this middle section here, if it does, how does it work for you? We need to get more of the students who are struggling with reading in their school assignments, etc., to think about that. Like, why does that visual image work for you? And if it works for them in the if it works for them in a similar way that the printed text works for you, if you're more linguistically oriented, why not let that struggling reader use the modality that is speaking to him or her? And finally, how does it connect to text outside itself? That's going back to that idea I was talking about in terms of intertextuality. It's a big word, but it's a handy word to have. It just means that a text that you are, say, looking at in a museum, you recall a movie, that movie recalls a podcast, that podcast recalls a lecture hall you sat in or whatever. And these are such complicated but neat in real life sorts of connections. These are the kinds of connections I think we should be making, helping students make. We can't make them for the students, but we can help them. And also because I think that I said in my subtitle to this talk is, are we willing to let our learners teach us? And here's where I am most willing. I teach pop culture and literacies as a course at the University of Georgia. I'm not a particularly good TV series watcher, and so many times the papers they turn in or the discussions they have on Hangout, Google Hangouts, etc., turn to an area that I know nothing about. So I can't work 24/7 day in and day out, and I'm not that interested maybe in a television series anyway. So I ask the students, please help me figure out how does it connect to other things, that TV series, that I might know something about, like maybe a novel or a informational text or a trip to some museum in Atlanta or whatever. And that kind of sharing, this idea of not expecting me, the teacher, to know everything, but to say to the students in my classes, help me. I need some quick help. I don't want you to go into a long explanation, but just tell me something that connects with something else. That's that cog. And by doing that, they feel part of the teaching learning situation also. They're not always the learners, and I'm always the teacher. We reverse roles all the time. In fact, I would say we do this all the time in life, in teaching and learning. It's only seen as sometimes as a binary in a course where the teacher's name appears at the top and the syllabus, and then the students are told to do thus, thus, and thus. Okay, looking closer at text as a cog. This is getting into some fairly higher philosophical thought, so I'm going to go quickly over it, but I do want to leave those of you with an interest in this with an idea of what you might do in terms of this. If you read Deleuze, who's out of Columbia University, 1995, he's written a lot, but if you read about some of Deleuze, Gilles is his first name, you will find out more about what a text is in contact with. And so those of you who are writing dissertations or who are writing books of your own, maybe you are a researcher who's interpreted a study in terms of a Deleuzian concept, this would be a really good slide to pay attention to and to read more deeply on. It's a series of experiments for each reader in the midst of events that may have nothing to do with text. Be prepared for a real wild ride, in a sense, when you start to read Deleuze. This is called post-structuralism, and as a result of that, many people are not comfortable with that and don't want to spend the time getting comfortable with it, which is fine. But if you are one of those who wants to like sort of blow your mind a little bit, you might try to look up Deleuze. But now going back to a more mundane but very, very important idea about how do you relate reading, writing, speaking, and linguistic modes to afford communication, but in a limited way. You know you're doing that all the time. I'm doing it right now. You're seeing just visuals, still images. I'm talking a mile a minute, etc. This is not the most engaging way to teach. And certainly I understand that, and therefore would like to have you look at some other ways, other modes of doing things. And that would be through sounds, images, icons, gestures, performances. All of those modes are communicating. We in the Western world have never given much play or much thought of anything beyond language, because we are fairly well educated, and it's all education has meant studying with books and papers and writing, etc., speaking and to public groups, etc. But there are many other ways of learning, and the kids can help you with that when you ask them, how do you learn about something that you're interested in? Again, a real easy question to ask. Just be prepared to be astounded by the things that you hear. They're pretty much, I'm not saying that, I'm not buying into the myth that they are all tech savvy. I know they're not. I have students in my college level classes who really can't use even some of the more simple listservs or discussions and find their way around, but they may be very good at doing something else technically that I can't do. So we need to get to know who the experts are on different things in our classes and collectively use them to help us become better teachers and to help their peers become better learners too. Just one slide on visual literacy, infographics. I'm skipping around here a little bit, going from Deleuze to infographics, and I realize I'm doing that, but I'm doing it on purpose to show you the range of things that people are finding useful in classrooms right now. If you're good at infographics or can visualize or can find something that can be shared on the web with your students, you can see the information that you can get across in an infograph. It would take you maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs to read that. It would be perhaps, well, it would be probably less visually appealing. Again, that's your perception, and my perception might not be the same. All right, so we're going to go into now, I've been talking about, with all these texts and people producing it here and there and wherever, we really do need to help students learn to read critically. And that whole notion of reading critically is, again, it's not brand new, but it's been smothered in a way. Critical reading has, by meaning just to take something and find something in a source like an encyclopedia that tells you whether or not some authority says that you've interpreted something correctly. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not the kind of critical reading or critical literacy that I'm talking about today. That's why the equal sign has no. That's not the same as being critically aware. Because as the slide shows, while critical reading involves a standard or a norm, like an authority saying, yes, you interpreted that correctly, critical awareness just means that you're discovering how a text, a video, any kind of a text, is positioning you and others. And it will go into a little demo lesson that you can use. But just remember that that's critical awareness, and that's really what I'm speaking about when I talk about critical literacy. So how do you develop this critical awareness or critical literacy? You are looking for the subtext. That is, what doesn't the author, the painter, the musician, whoever, the dancer, who's ever providing us with a text broadly defined, what is the message they're really trying to communicate? What do you think they're trying to communicate? And what's your evidence? Now again, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer in this, but it gets the individual learning to be critically aware, not to accept text at face value. That's where we get in trouble in terms of not thinking more deeply about what that person who made that text is intending for us to get out of the message, out of the production rather. We don't have to agree with that person. We can push back, and that's what this idea is in this next little simple little activity where I would have you look for underlying assumptions. I do this because I didn't exactly make it up, but I don't know of anyone who's done the exact thing. I published about looking for underlying assumptions in many different articles. But what I like about it is that I have taken other people's ideas and molded them in a way that fits my classes. And I use this in my college classes too, especially if we're looking at something that's maybe in the news right now, like the new ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and I want to get a lot of opinions out there right away, then I will show this on the board. And you don't have to make anything in advance. All you have to remember is there are 3 things: explain, elaborate, defend. And in my mind, and some of the research I've done, that's enough to get to that subtext. So, explain what happened. That's your idea, literally. What did you see happening? We're going to go through a little short 21-word shortest short story in the next slide. Elaborate. Why did it happen? And how do you know? That's the evidence. Okay, read this little short story. It has all the elements of a good English literature text. It has a setting. It has a building up to suspense and then a denouement, etc. Okay, so I'm going to show you the slide that you saw just previous to this one, and I would leave this new one up if I were doing this in a classroom. What are the underlying assumptions? And I would toggle back and forth. Explain what happened, okay? Ugh. Explain what happened. And then if you needed to go back even further and show the slide of the short story. It's a very literal level almost, but nobody in a large audience. I've done this with this demo with people, with 1,000 people in an audience, and they all get to laughing about how the person sitting next to them did not come up with the same explain what happened, because everybody has a different interpretation going into this. And then, why did it happen? And then the most important question of all, how do you know you're right? That's the evidence. And you can do things with duos, two people working on this, arguing back and forth in a facilitative way. You can do it with pair share, like two people on one side of the table come up with their explain, elaborate, defend, and then two people opposite them do the same thing, and then they share with each other and try to convince each other that the other person is correct or whatever. It's a fun way. I have never seen it fail, not even, as I said, in large audiences where I've done this with to demonstrate why critical awareness is important and why it's easy to teach. But if we just assume people know it and do it, I think that's a big assumption. I want to leave you with a short video. I think you'll enjoy this. It's cartoonish in a way, but it's got a lot of hits. And people like it because it sort of sums up what this whole idea is that we are talking about when we say digital literacies, living in a digital era, letting people help you, letting your students help you become a better teacher as a result of them working with you on this, etc. I think you'll see it all in this little video. It takes very short time to show, and I hope you enjoy that.
Once upon a time, long, long ago, in a land not so far away, there lived the Heffalumps. They had no written forms of communication and relied on oral communication. Children went to school to learn to memorise all the important knowledge that a Heffalump should know. One day, someone invented a code for writing, an alphabet. Enthusiasts became very excited and started to learn to read and write, and they started to make books to pass on information. Children started joining in. They found they didn't need to memorise things. They could write them down and even read books to learn new things. Young Heffalumps who went to school begged teachers to allow them to use books and writing. A few schools spent money setting up special rooms of desks with paper and pencils and special locked cupboards containing books that the Heffalumps were allowed to use under very strict supervision on certain occasions when they had finished all of their proper work. Teachers lamented the new technology and how it was interfering with students' ability to memorise. They just didn't seem interested anymore and were no longer meeting standardised testing benchmarks. Books and pencils had to be banned from class as they were a serious distraction. To the young Heffalumps, school seemed very boring and pointless in comparison. Some students even stopped going to school altogether. They felt they could learn faster and better from books. Meanwhile, the teachers started to learn a few bits of writing themselves. They found it useful for occasional shopping lists and sending messages to other teachers. But really, they didn't have enough time because they were too busy working out better ways of keeping the students under control in the classroom and attending professional learning sessions on ways to get the young Heffalumps more interested and engaged in memorising things. Some students even asked to have their very own desks. And so the government sent out a directive that all heffalumps of ages 9 to 12 should have their own desks. Where would the schools fit them? Who would train the teachers? Who would pay for all the pencil sharpeners? Memory standards would drop. Oh dear, where would it all end?
Finally, thank you for your attention. If you'd like to contact me, that's my email address underneath my name.